Oh, yes. Sekou Smith from NBA.com. My main man, Lang Whitaker.
Yo.
The Rabbit Hunter in New York. The Hang Time podcast this week. Schedule release. It's out, Lang. We know our lives. We know where we're going to be basically between now and April, 11th?
That's when the playoffs start?
I think that's the last day of the regular season. I mean,
yeah.
we know exactly where our lives will take us every week throughout the course of the 2017-18 NBA season. League released the schedule. It's interesting. It starts a full week earlier this year, October 17th, opening night with a monster doubleheader.
And October, that's like 2 weeks earlier than it used to be, right? Like,
well, it's 10 days, like around 10 days, I guess, basically.
I remember there
usually
being
it's Halloween. It's usually
I remember like going to the Nets openers and like coming back into the city and like the whole city being full of people in costumes.
Yeah, so this is the new wrinkle that has been trending the last few years of, addressing player rest and recovery and just easing the burden of an 82-game grind on the players. Right. I like it. I don't mind the season starting earlier. I like it. I like that there are, for the first time in the history of the league, no 4 and 5 nights on the schedule, which is amazing that you would be able to figure out a way. I tell you what, that tells you about technology, that you would be able to get that out of the schedule for everybody, to eliminate that thing that's one thing that every team universally there was, pushback on having to do 4 and 5 nights.
I heard someone making the argument, or just pointing out, I can't remember who it was on Twitter, who was saying that, the one thing that teams used to say when they would rest guys would be like, well, it's these 4 and 5s that are killers.
Right.
Now that excuse is gone. So if you're going to do the rest thing, it's going to have to be, well, there's too many back-to-backs. Is that going to be the next thing that's going to be targeted by all these coaches?
That's even been trimmed dramatically.
Yeah.
Everything about the work the league has done the past, 3-4 years has been to address all of those concerns. And shout out to the schedule makers, for attacking this in the way that they have. I don't care who wants to take credit for it. I think everybody will be happy if we see the stars more often than we have the past couple of years. If we eliminate this whole, conversation about players resting and what that means to the fans and, how that obstructs, the viewing pleasures of people on these big games, these national TV games and that sort of thing. You highlighted a bunch of games that are must-watch, absolutely can't-miss games for NBA.com. Some interesting matchups that you threw in there, Lang. And I don't like to take days off during the season. I don't believe in scribe rest, so I try and, even if I only have one eye open, I try and keep an eyeball on the games. But let's attack some of these games you've highlighted. And opening night, obviously everybody will be locked in. We're only 9 weeks away from opening night, and we got the Celtics and Cavs and the Rockets and Warriors, a doubleheader on TNT that'll just be outlandish to kick the season off with those 4 teams. But what's your favorite matchup that you highlighted in your piece about the can't miss games?
I tried to. I mean, the easiest thing to do is, and it's so West heavy this year that the easiest thing to do is you could do 10 games to not miss, and you could just have Houston against Golden State, and then you could do Golden State against somebody. You could just kind of do all those matchups that are going to happen in the West. There's going to be a lot of can't miss Western Conference matchups this year. So I was trying to spread it around a little bit and trying to highlight some teams like Milwaukee or Minnesota or some of the teams that could be on the come up this season and are probably maybe getting overshadowed a little bit. So, one series that I think is sort of gotten forgotten about in the midst of all this that's going to be a lot of fun to watch is that Washington-Boston series this season.
Funeral games, baby. Bring it.
I covered that series in the playoffs, and as people complained about the playoffs not having enough drama, that was the one series that was really good. Arguably the best series that we had in the up until the final. So I feel like the Washington Boston is going to be a lot of fun, and that's one of the Christmas Day games. But we also get it 4 times during the year. So that'll be a good one to keep an eye on.
Back-to-backs reduced to 14.4 per team, by the way. Let me make sure I point that out as, like I said, another one of those wrinkles. And make sure you can check out the complete NBA schedule on NBA.com and with the NBA app, and you can get on every team's website and look at their, all the different nuances of their own scheges
How do you play 0.4 of a back-to-back?
Say what now?
How do you play 0.4 of a back-to-back?
I don't know. Hey, listen, take that up with the analytics people, man. Don't get on my case. Ask Schumann. I mean, ask John Schumann.
0.4 of a back-to-back is just a game, right?
Get on Schumann's case when we get him on here shortly to give us some of his impressions of the schedule. The Christmas Day lineup, Lang, Sixers at Knicks, Cavs at Warriors, and the finals rematch that we always get a taste of that on Christmas Day. The Wizards and Celtics, as you mentioned, will be a part of that Christmas Day lineup. Rockets and Thunder, which should be fantastic with Paul George joining Oklahoma City, Chris Paul on Houston. That becomes a game that has all sorts of good subplots when you already have James Harden and, the reigning MVP, Kia MVP, Russell Westbrook in that mix. And then the thing I really love about Christmas Day, and I'm going to be calling the bosses and trying to figure out how I can get to L.A. for Christmas, Timberwolves Lakers, little futures game, little nice little Lonzo Ball showcase. I mean, I will even suffer through sitting next to LeVar Ball if I have to get to L.A. on Christmas, if that's one of the requirements.
That's your dessert for Christmas Day. You stay up all day. You watch it. I mean, look, those are two teams that I think they both think they're going to be in the playoff mix this year.
Yes.
I know Lonzo does because he's told it to me on TV the other day on live TV. So I think they think that they got a shot at making this thing happen. The Lakers are going to be an interesting team to watch. There's going to be, if they play the way that they played in Summer League and when they have Lonzo at the helm running that show, they're going to be a lot of fun to keep an eye on and to watch.
Newsflash, Lakers, the teams you're going to be playing during the regular season are going to be quite different than the teams you saw in Vegas.
Yeah.
I know there's this – I know their fans were fired up. I hope they're not setting themselves up for a fall when they get to the season and
they
realize –
probably are.
Yeah, they realize, hey, it's going to be a little tougher than you think.
Well, I asked guys. On that rookie photo shoot show we did on NBA TV, I asked Lonzo what are realistic expectations for this team, and he said, "Well, we think we can be a playoff team." And I said, "Even in the Western Conference, you think that?" And he said, "Yep." So, but look, you got to have your hopes set high, right? So I can see why the goal is what it is.
I think next time you should omit the word realistic because that doesn't fit into the equation for Lakers fans. I mean, like I've seen people saying they think the Lakers, they're going to be a 6 seed into something. Like, dude, it's a lot more grinding that needs to be done for that group to get into the playoff mix in the Western Conference. I think it's wishful thinking, and I admire the ambition, but I don't know that it's realistic to assume that they're going to make that leap right away.
Right.
But I'm not trying to be a pessimist. I'm just trying to look at it through a sober lens and understand that the West is stacked.
Yeah.
I mean, the West is stacked this year.
I
think the Timberwolves, Lang, are going to have some work to do to become a playoff team.
I mean, yeah, no kidding. They finished like 20 games under 500 last year, right? Yeah.
Yes.
It's no joke. I mean, even if you improve 10 games to be a 500 team, I don't know if that gets you in the playoffs in the West. So, there's still teams ahead of them that are not quite a lock for the playoffs, but like a Portland or a Denver, So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see if even one of these teams that we're talking about, the Lakers, Minnesota, is able to get up into that mix.
Yeah. All right. I think people need to print out your marquee matchups that you hooked up. I'm going to hold on to that for the rest of the season. Celtics Sixers division rivals meet for the first time with these new rosters on October 20th. Warriors Spurs. I think those of us who pay attention to these things remember the thumping that the Spurs put on the Warriors to open up last season. Turns out it didn't mean a whole lot in the final analysis. They hook up again on November 2nd with the Warriors going to San Antonio. Thunder, Pacers, Paul George goes back to Indy on December 13th. That new rivalry between the Bucks and the Raptors, we call it the Hartzell Bowl, January 1st. And Martin Luther King Day, of course, is a huge day for the NBA. Warriors Cavs play their second matchup, second and final of the regular season on January 15th. in Cleveland. And the Wolves and Bulls, Jimmy Butler goes back to Chicago on February 2nd. Mark a check by all those games and many more in this NBA season. So, Lang, with the adjustments that have been made, the migration of the talent from east to west, is Cleveland Golden State the best rivalry in the league right now, or is there something else out there that strikes you? Is it?
It's weird to even talk about Cleveland right now because we don't know what's going to happen.
True.
You know, it's so hard to figure out what team are we going to see this year, and what I don't know what to make of them. What team are they going to put on the floor? What's going to happen with this team? I mean, I guess it's still a rivalry because these are two teams that were in the finals against each other for the last 3 years,
right?
And they always seem to rise to the occasion. But if Cleveland trades Kyrie, is that still a rivalry between those two teams?
Depends on what they get for him. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, to me, like the more interesting rivalries are like sort of the smaller ones, like that Washington-Boston one was a good one.
You know what my favorite one is? Oklahoma City and Houston.
Yeah.
I love Harden and Westbrook being pitted against each other in the MVP race the last year, and then what that looks like going forward with the additions they've made. I like that. I like that rivalry between those two.
How about Golden State, San Antonio? And I know
the problem.
I know
with
one
that,
team just got swept in the playoffs, but that first half when they had the 20-point lead, and you're like, man, if this team's healthy,
if we could just see, if we could see it on even footing for once between the two of them, I'd love it. But we haven't gotten a chance to see that enough.
I know.
Let's see what other rivalry sticks out to me. The East,
the
East doesn't have great rivalries to me right now.
Is Minnesota Chicago a rivalry now, or is
I think it will be once Jimmy Butler goes back and gives the Bulls 30, or they get smoked. Like whatever happens after that game, February 2nd, then we'll know more. But they're only going to see each other twice.
Yeah,
during the regular season.
Like
so it's
Indiana OKC is the same situation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that those games, when there's only two of them, it makes it a little tougher for me if they're not championship rivals, like not playing.
Right. Yeah.
There's not a chance you see him in the finals.
Yeah.
Who are the teams you're most excited to watch this year with all the changes that have gone on?
Besides Atlanta?
I'll get to them in a minute.
I'm curious to see the Thunder with Paul George and how he's going to play in and what happens to the way Russ played last year.
Right.
Do we still get Terminator Russ? Or
Russ?
Is he going to scale it back a little bit? And how does Paul George fit into what they're doing?
Right.
To me, that's an interesting one. The Sixers are a team that I put them on the list. I put their opening game on the list because I want to see Ben Simmons play. I want to see Joel Embiid play. I want them to be healthy. I want to see Markelle Fultz play with these guys. I want to see, the sky is sort of the limit with that team. What about you?
The ceiling is the roof, baby. To me, most intriguing team to me, one of them is Phoenix. I need to see who's on their roster. But I got to look out for my boy Devin Booker, Grand Rapids, Michigan native stand-up. I want to see, as good as he's been, through these first couple seasons, I got to see if they're getting better as a group because I don't want him wasting that talent in a situation where they're not progressing and moving towards being a playoff team. And I think with Josh Jackson, some of the other young guys they got maturing, I'm hoping they improve. They make a trade now. If they, they've been one of the teams rumored, with Kyrie. That would be interesting. Portland's another team that could change dramatically if Dame Lillard and C.J. McCollum have their way and find a way to convince Carmelo Anthony to drop that no trade and join them, which I still think that's a pipe dream, but I love how bold they are about speaking it into existence. I got to keep an eye on the Bucks now that they got a Michigan man on the roster and DJ Wilson and Giannis and the longest, leanest, most athletic team in the NBA and what kind of problems they can cause for people. Obviously, I'm going to pay attention to all of the big, the high-profile teams, the teams that are championship contenders, but those teams stick out to me in terms of what they might do this season. And the other one is I'm looking for a bounce back of is my man Kemba Walker in Charlotte with Dwight in tow, and I want to see what kind of thing Steve Clifford can put together with that team because the East is wide open after Cleveland and Boston and Toronto to me. Those three in particular.
You know what else is wide open?
Uh-oh.
the lottery, the race for the number one pick. We're gonna have to start a segment called Lottery Watch or something now with the Hawks.
I was gonna say, why don't we just call it Atlanta Hawks NBA season 2017-18? I mean, seriously.
The schedule. The
season's over after 5 games. You might as well just hang it up after that opening 5-game stretch.
They start with a 5-game road trip, and then their first home game is Paul Millsap's return.
When I saw it, I was like, man,
put 40 on him.
I was like, man, what is this payback for? Like when I saw it, I was like, you got to be joking. 0-6 to start the season, your Hawks. What happens when they start 0-6?
I mean, it looks like that's the plan. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Anybody else with a brutal start? You know, when you look at their schedule, you look at it and just say, man, they got no shot.
I don't know. I don't want to say they have no shot, but a mutual friend of ours, Mark Boyle from the Pacers,
yes,
the radio announcer, he posted a graphic of the travel of all the teams, and Minnesota has the most miles to go of any team in the league this year, and I think that's their location.
Right.
Steve Ashburn, our colleague, wrote a comment about how, because they're the easternmost team in the Western Conference,
they're always
they're always on the go. So I think
always
for
going
them,
back against the grain,
yeah.
I don't know how much sympathy I have. I mean, I will say this about the travel. I mean, it's not like they got to get a connecting flight, here, there, and everywhere. It's like they are flying charter, so there is an element of expediency and luxury to the way they're traveling. It's not. I don't think anybody needs to be crying for these guys, but it is a grind. There's no question about that.
I'll tell you one other team I want to keep an eye on this year that we didn't mention yet, and I'm curious if the old addition by subtraction thing happens here. Utah. We were talking about playoff teams and what, which teams that are not quite a lock for the playoffs. I don't know if Utah is considered a lock without Gordon Hayward, but
and George Hill.
True. So they have my son Ricky Rubio now at point, and it's going to be interesting to watch them play, I think.
They're another team. You're right. We need to add to the list of teams we're eager to watch just to see what happens with them.
Especially because Ricky's looking like the most interesting man in the world most these days. Have you seen him he's got the long flowing hair?
He's rocking
thick beard.
He's rocking the beard that you don't have, but all you guys are rocking the hipster haircut, by the way, which we got to talk about this hipster haircut thing. It's getting a little out of hand. We know what we think about some of this stuff, but of course, what's a week on the Hang Time podcast without checking in with our main man, John Schumann? I'm curious to see what the schedule looks like through his matrix eyes and whether or not he agrees with some of our points. Shu, what's up, sir?
Fellas, what's going on?
Just breaking down the schedule, trying to figure out where everybody's going to be between now and April. But what does it look like to you in terms of, we know that how hard the league has worked to build in some rest and recuperation time into the schedule, eliminating the 4 and 5 nights, easing yet again the back-to-backs, man. What does your computerized mind think of what they've done?
Well, yeah, I've thrown it all into a spreadsheet, and I'm in the process of breaking it all down.
Right.
For me, it's not only about rest; it's also about fairness. In the number of back-to-backs, they reduced the average number of back-to-backs. I think it was 16.6 last year or something like that.
Yeah, and it's down to 14.4 now.
14.4, we know that.
To 14.4. But they've also reduced the variance in the number of back-to-backs. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, last year the average was 16.6. 4 teams had 16. 10 teams had 17. So there were sort of 14 that had around the average. Mm-hmm. But you had 2 teams that had only 14. You had 1 team that had 19. This year, there's only the average is 14.4, and teams either have 13, 14, 15, or 16. And 14 teams have 14 back-to-backs, and 9 teams have 15 back-to-backs. So that's 23 teams that are right around either less than 1 or above or below the average versus 14 teams last year. So I think the variance is less too, so that makes everything a little bit more fair. There's not one team with, there's not, like last year, there's 2 teams that had 14 back-to-backs, and there's one team that had 19. And then the other thing, the one thing that you don't really see is when you first look at it, is the games that teams are playing against opponents that are on a back-to-back. So like, as much as being on a back-to-back is a disadvantage for Team A, it's an advantage for Team B if they're rested and then they're playing an opponent on a back-to-back. And so there's more variance in that number. Like this year, there's one team that's playing 9 games against opponents on a back-to-back, on the second game of a back-to-back, and there's 2 teams that are playing 19 of those games. Right. So there's definitely more variance in that, but there's less variance in that than there was last year. Like, for instance, the Nets played only 7 games last year against opponent on the second night of a back-to-back, and there were 7 teams that played 21 of those games. So 7 teams that played 3 times as many of those games as the Nets did. And so break it all down, you get, like, this year there are 327 total games where one team is rested, meaning they didn't play the night before, and the other team is not, meaning they did play the night before. Last year that number was 349, so they've reduced that. So I think it's also in addition to getting players more rest, which is great. It's also making a little bit more balanced and fair from team to team when you look at sort of rest advantage games and having that, playing the second night of a back-to-back against a rested opponent, like that number has gone down, and so there's less sort of variance as far as how much rest advantage games teams have. If that makes any sense.
For guys like Lang who fell asleep in stats class at UGA, you want to explain that again in like English?
I do have a question, John. What is 0.4 of a back-to-back? How can a team play 0.4 of a back-to-back?
The average. What we call an average, Lang, is when you take up the total number and you divide it by the number of items, and therefore you get an average that doesn't necessarily equal a whole number.
Nice.
So, like the average amount of Doritos
we learned in 5th grade.
Shu, I don't understand.
It took 3.6 nerds to make the schedule.
I don't understand why people get so caught up in I understand the concerns about the amount of travel, but the mode of travel for these teams, to me, speaks more to the issue than anything. They're not flying commercial.
Right.
They're not.
True.
They're not dealing with.
I didn't fly during the commercial. I didn't fly commercial during the finals either. It doesn't mean I wasn't tired by by Game 7 a couple of years ago.
Yes. But I'm saying, would it make more sense? Like, to me, and maybe I'm wrong, wouldn't it make more sense to adjust the way you travel as much as it would to adjust the schedule? Like, don't fly out at 3:00 in the morning. Why wouldn't you know?
Yeah, that's the interesting one. Like, they always want teams there the night before, right? Like, to avoid like a travel
schedule
issue the day of,
travel,
and therefore you have to cancel a game, right? So if you can't fly the night before, you say you have some sort of travel issue the night before, at least you have the following day as a backup plan. Whereas if you say plan to travel on Tuesday for a Tuesday night game and there's some sort of issue with your plane or whatever, then you have nothing to fall back on. Yeah, I mean, I would also I think if you're close, teams in New York or Philadelphia should be able to travel to Washington, on the day of, take the train, the day of rather than having to get there the day before.
Zach Lowe wrote a big piece about the Nets on ESPN.com recently, and there was something in there about how the Nets are thinking about taking the train on day of to some of those Eastern Corridor games this year.
Yeah, they'd have to get special approval for that. Like, right. I know even when they're playing in Philadelphia, which is a less than 2 hour drive,
right.
Like they could just take the bus or whatever. Like, league rules state, they got to be there the night before,
Right.
And they would have to get some special approval if they wanted to travel day up.
It just seems to me that it would ease a lot of the physical tension of traveling if you didn't have to wake up or leave it, and be somewhere at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning flying and get there at an odd hour and then sleep half a. You know what I mean? Like the
right,
body,
but
the
if
body
you told
clock
the
would be
player,
different.
hey, we're not flying at 3. Instead of flying, say we just played a game in Washington and we got a game in our next game's in Charlotte or Florida somewhere. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, we're not going to fly at 3 in the morning right after our game. We're going to fly tomorrow morning at 11 or 12, right? So you can go home and you go back to the hotel and get 8 hours sleep. Do you think all the players are going to get that 8 hours of sleep anyway?
I mean, the other thing is these guys they have sort of rewired themselves so that they find their most energetic part of the day is at
in the wee hours,
at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night when they need to have their most energy.
Yeah,
and I think we think of it in our terms. We think of it,
when you get some sleep and then get up and be fresh. Yeah,
I got to wake up at this time, and it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it's a weird. To me, it's a weird situation because you're battling the logical ways you would think this would work for a normal person, and then you're battling people whose schedule dictates that they move around at these strange hours.
I mean, we feel it like when we're traveling for playoffs. We're up writing until the wee hours or whatever, and then you're not necessarily getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, shoot, Sekou, you're the dude that wakes up at like 7 o'clock in the morning every day, no matter what time you went to bed the night before covering a game, right? Like you always got to sort of find ways to make up for it.
Yeah, I do take naps at 3 o'clock every day in the afternoon.
So I mean, you could sort of understand it a little bit.
Yeah, it's to me, it's just a weird thing when you're trying to change. With all the sleep studies teams have done, and I don't, maybe some guys might sleep better on a plane than they would in a hotel room overnight. There's so many different, variables involved. I think, I told Lang earlier, John, I do applaud the league for taking all these concerns, addressing them, and then making the changes. I mean,
they're open-minded.
Yeah, this is something that wouldn't have been a part of it.
I don't know how open-minded they are in reducing the number of games from 82 to, say, 72 or something like that, but they're certainly open-minded as far as, making the changes that they have and continuing to try and do what's best. Because they know the team. I mean, they have the same, there was a presentation at the Sloan Conference a couple of years ago, or maybe last year, about the schedule. And, I mean, they're doing everything. They put everything into a computer, and they've definitely revamped the way they make the schedule as far as the system they use over the last few years. And it's all about, and they know the effects of player rest. They do the same analytics that most teams do as far as rest, and they have the same data that, you get from like the Sport View cameras as far as how well players are moving after a certain amount of rest or having played a back-to-back versus, not having been rested the day before. So the league is up front about it, and they take suggestions from the teams. And definitely you got to be happy about that, and that we're moving forward as far as protecting the players and presenting a better product.
I'll just ask Siri what we should do. I mean, Siri, just let me check with Siri and see what she thinks. Lang, you have it, and you and John both have an interesting dynamic when we're talking about this travel, cross-country travel, like having to go from New York, back west across the country. That, to me, always seems like a grind in itself, just the distance. Do you think that this notion, and we've heard the talk this summer, about expansion at some point. And I've always thought that this notion that you could expand across oceans and that sort of thing has been too far-fetched, just from a logistical travel standpoint. But if you don't have to worry about 4 and 5 nights and you continue to eliminate the specter of back-to-backs, is it realistic to think there's going to be a time here in the foreseeable future when you could have teams outside of the continental U.S. and it makes logistical travel sense to be able to do it?
Honestly, for me, that jumping on a plane and going 6 hours to San Francisco is not the tiring part. The tiring part is the 3 hours before you get on the plane, where you have to get to the airport, you stand in line, you check your bag, you go through security, you wait at the gate, you have to wrestle with the people in the zones to get on the plane and get your bag in and all that. I mean, when you're on the plane, you're just sitting there. You're watching movies. You're not there's no stress involved. If you're able to sleep on a plane, it's all the difference in the world. So to me, this goes back to what we were just talking about. When you're flying charter, as those of us who have been lucky enough to do this with the teams before, there's no standing in line anywhere. You walk. They do security at the arena. You get on the bus. You just drive right up to the plane. You get on the plane, and the plane takes off. So for the players, if they're able to figure out this, I mean, there's still going to be some. I don't know if having one team 7 hours away is going to make it worthwhile. I still think there has to be a couple of teams that they would have to set up so you could fly over and play all those teams. Right. But I don't think it's that big of a thing. So
I think it's more about like the multiple jumps. Like, if for instance, one of the bad parts of schedules that I've seen in the past are like when you have a trip and you're just making multiple jumps across many cities in a row. Like I think that's where fatigue starts to set in, where you're not really settled. Like, so I like when a team, when they have, which they've done also recently, is allowed teams to play the Knicks and Nets in the same trip, or the Knicks, and like you don't have to go. Like there's been trips, in the past where a team plays New York and then Milwaukee and then back to Philadelphia. You got to reduce that kind of stuff, the jumping around too. So like if you had only one team abroad, like somewhere, that would be tough. Like because you're just playing one game and you're coming back. It would have to be like around, when you came back, maybe you could set it up so when a team played, London or whatever, then they come back and have to play, at least 2 home games in a row or something where they could settle a little bit and get that travel fatigue out of their system.
Right.
Because like I said, like covering a 7-game series, like I've covered, an Eastern Conference 7-game series, and the travel distance wasn't bad, but just like the bouncing back and forth when you get to the 1-1-1 part of the series is just a pain, and that's draining.
Yeah, and we were talking. John and I were talking I think it was at the rookie photo shoot the other day. Just like I covering like Washington and Boston. It's not that far from New York. It takes you 4 hours to get there just because of all the other stuff, all the waiting and the security and all that. So.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting. To me, it's something that I agree, Shu, that the amount of data that goes into this now is so great, that you wonder what's the tipping point, what pushes the league to act in one way or another based on all of the information that's been compiled. So it's I'll be interested to see, though, how because that's the one thing I'll say about the NBA. I don't cover the NFL or any other professional sports league, so I can only speak to the NBA. But, man, the amount of comprehension of all these different things that go into the pie now is just tremendous. And trying to sort it through it all and figure it all out, to me, has got to be a monster of a task for whoever at the league is doing it. I'm sure it's multiple departments and people involved, but that kind of undertaking every offseason, and throughout the course of every season is just crazy to me. And it speaks to me the changing dynamic, something that I think has changed in the years I've been covering the league. Even if they were doing it, 17 years ago, 18 years ago, I don't remember there being the public, conversation about it the way we have now, and how willing the commissioner is to address some of these topics and to respond to the, the questions being asked about some of these topics. So it makes for interesting ideas about what we might see. 5 years ago, did you think the league would ever have been able to do so much with rest in the schedule? And like, what could be done in another 5 years of studying this stuff and addressing some of these issues?
Maybe we'll be able to cover games without having to get off our couch finally. That's when I'll know technology has reached its
Spoken
apex.
like a man looking forward to the lazy future. I love it.
You remember in that movie WALL-E, and they get on at the end the robot gets on the spaceship and all the people are just like sort of chair bound and the chairs move them around. Like they don't even have to walk anywhere. Some of us look at that as aspirational.
Yeah.
Speak for yourself. As a father of a couple of preteens, I welcome getting out of the house to go cover games once or twice a week.
Let's hope Mrs. Schumann doesn't listen to the podcast. She'll be smacking you upside your head.
Schumann's kitchen almost burned down.
What?
His new kitchen.
Already?
We had an electrical issue with one of our new outlets.
See?
All's good though. No issues. Thank you to the circuit breaker. Everything was okay.
See, if you'd have had Chip and JoJo working on that thing and had these issues.
Shiplap doesn't catch fire.
Oh, man. When does school start up there in the Northeast, by the way? We've been in school for like a month. When do y'all start?
Day after Labor Day.
Good grief. Hurry up already. You guys got too much time on your hands. Hey, before we let you go, any ideas on what you think happens? And this is a question I pose to both you guys. Do we get some movement on Kyrie and or Carmelo before training camp? And Shu, we can't let you leave without giving us your trivia question. So when you get done answering that question, throw some trivia at us as well.
All right. So with both those, I'm going to guess no, because I think like if it could have happened, if there was a trade out there to be had for either of those guys, I think it probably would have happened already. Like I don't see what the difference is between now and opening of camp versus the past few weeks. But like once we get to the December 15th and players who were signed can be traded, then that's the real point. So I think we may get go into camp, go into the regular season. Those guys still on their teams, and then December 15th is the time to look, because you can maybe look at Kyrie to Minnesota for Wiggins and Teague trade, and that would require Teague to be trade eligible, and that's not until December 15th. So my guess is no, nothing happens between now and training camp, because why wouldn't it have happened already?
I agree with John, and I'm going to go one step further. I think one of these two guys is going to mess everything up by getting off to like an incredible start, or either a great or a bad start, and then by the time December 15th comes around, like what if the Knicks start out 8-2 or something, and Carmelo, the triangle out the window, they go back to playing him at the 4, and they start off hot or something, and then you can't make the deal. So it'll be interesting to see if I just think the longer you wait, the more things are going to change in the circumstances here.
Yeah. All right, Shu, what do you got trivia-wise? We can't let you get out of here without some good trivia.
All right. This one's a favorite, like, little piece of trivia of mine. I know I've mentioned it on Twitter before. I don't think I've asked you guys, at least not in the last 6 months or so. Mm-hmm. So in his 14 years in the league, LeBron James has played 50,400 minutes total, including playoffs, which is about 7,500 more than any other player in the league. So it's basically like he's played 3 additional seasons. So who's second on total minutes since the 2003-04 season? That's the trivia part of it.
Dirk Nowitzki.
Total minutes after LeBron.
Since 2000.
Dirk is third at 40,000.
Since when?
This guy's
Since
at
2000.
42,900 minutes, playoffs and included.
Dwayne Wade.
Since 03-04.
Dwayne Wade.
He's fourth at 38.9. Those are 2 good guesses. You got number 3 and number 4.
Who would
Is
be
it an
behind
active?
LeBron?
It's an active player.
Active player, still active.
Playoffs included.
Playoffs included.
So it's got to be a guy who's seen a lot of playoff action, probably, right?
Tony Parker.
He's 6th.
Oh.
Man.
Yeah, this guy stayed a lot of playoffs. One team that he sort of made it. I think the team that we know him most for it went to the playoffs several years in a row.
Rajon Rondo.
Nope.
James Harden.
No. James Harden hasn't been. I don't think James Harden's not even in the top 25. He's been near the top in total minutes recently, but he wasn't drafted
Who else
early
has been
enough.
around as long as LeBron and these guys has played those kind of minutes?
This guy,
I'm surprised Vince Carter isn't in the top 5. Seems like he's been playing for 27 years. I don't know. I think
Vince Carter, is number 18 on the list.
Shu, you stumping us this week, bro. I'm trying to think. Who could that be?
This one is tough. This guy is a 7-time All-Star.
Good grief.
What year was he
He's
drafted?
probably a favorite of both of you guys. Both of you guys probably one of your favorite guys in the league.
What year was he drafted?
He was drafted in 2001, so he's played 6. He came in the league 2 years before LeBron. But like I said, his second in minutes since LeBron was drafted.
Active player. Oh, I know who it is. ISO.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, of
Joe
course, yeah.
Johnson.
Of course.
Joe Johnson. I was amazed. Like,
Jesus.
he's played 16 years. He's missed a total of 75 games, which is an average of less than 5 preseason. In his last 4 years, Joe Johnson, who is like 30, how old is he now? 36. He's 36 years old. In the last 4 years, he's missed a total of 8 games.
That's because the dude is he doesn't do anything but play basketball and video games. He's the
Ben Simmons has already missed more games in his career than Joe Johnson has.
I told Tony Bradley, who's going to be a rookie on the Jazz, we were just having small talk while he was charging his phone on my charger, and I asked him if he'd spent much time in Salt Lake City, and he said he's about to go out there and start meeting guys. And I was like, look, if Joe Johnson doesn't speak to you for a couple of weeks at a time, don't worry about it. Yeah, that's just how he is.
I covered the dude for years. He didn't speak for an entire season one time. Nobody. I mean, it was like we didn't take it personal. You bring up Joe. Let me ask you guys one last thing. With the Hall of Fame looming in the distance, is Joe Johnson going to the Naismith Memorial Hall of Fame someday?
That's a great question. I mean, longevity is a factor, I assume.
He was a great college player. He was kind of a seminal player in the history of Arkansas basketball. They won an SEC tournament championship when he was there. He's had a distinguished NBA career. Remember, it's your entire basketball body of work.
I'm trying to see where he's number 42 on the all-time scoring list right now, and he's going to go up that list because he could go up about 10 spots conceivably in the next year or two. I don't know. I mean, I think if he retires and he's in like the top 30 scorers of all time, that to me that cements it. I mean, he could probably play. I mean, he's 36 and he's clearly durable. Yeah. He could probably play 4 or 5 more years.
I just wonder. I mean, we always get into these debates about players and how history will view him. To me, Joe's one of those guys who history is going to view him much better in hindsight than we're looking at him now.
Yeah, there was a while there where he was just people put his contract above the player. Like they put the contract before the player is. When he was with Brooklyn, especially, maybe his last year in Atlanta, where it was like, yeah, Joe Johnson, yeah, but he's getting paid, however, $100-something million or whatever. I think people, there's certain sequences with the Jazz and even with the Nets, like when he was destroying the Raptors at one time in the playoffs, like where people really started to appreciate, holy cow, this dude can get buckets, and he's a bad dude in that regard as far as just backing you down and getting buckets. And I think now in Utah, people will start to appreciate him a little bit more. He's on a reasonable contract, but still getting buckets, never runs more than, never runs faster than he needs to. And, it's breaking news. Like, when he gets a fast break or something like that, that's breaking news, but, he is who he is. And, he's
the reason all these, the reason all these teams do ISO Joe is because it works and he's good at it. and they let it. And it's all these you always hear. Oh, you got to move the ball. You can't have this 1-on-1. Well, what if this guy's able to score more than half the time when he got 1-on-1? When he was in his prime on the Hawks, and the Hawks were winning 20 games in a season, and Sekou was cursing them, I always felt that if there was a 1-on-1 contest among NBA players, I think he would have as good a shot as anybody as winning the thing because he could.
He gets you on his hip. He gets that rear end between you and him, and there's nothing you can do about it. Like he's got that wide base that once he puts you on his hip, like you can't get to him. You can't get to his shot. So.
What's funny? Just showing off once again how unbelievably freaking old I am. I was covering the SEC when Joe came into the league. He had to sit out the first semester, and Nolan Richardson was telling us how good he was. This is pre-internet, of course, and pre-social media. So all we had to go by was word of mouth, kind of what we'd heard, what Nolan was saying. And Joe was like, if you put his picture from his freshman year at Arkansas up next to his picture now, you'd be like, this dude is this dude? Because he weighs probably about 65 pounds more now than he did then. You would have never guessed Joe would be the kind of physical specimen he is now. When he started out, he was a 6'7", 6'7.5" two guard who could handle the ball and facilitate, and he didn't have a pure looking stroke, but he had a good jump shot, and he was so athletic, and he was so quick, and such a big guy dominating in the backcourt. But to see players evolve the way he has, to me, is remarkable. Thinking back to what he was like back then, it's interesting, that you always have to judge a player based on his entire career as opposed to just what you think of him at the time. Remember how rough his start was when he came in the league? He didn't even last a full season in Boston, where they drafted him. Before they shipped him out, he goes to Phoenix, where he blossoms. In a real ensemble cast with Steve Nash and Shawn Marion and Mario, those guys. They blow that up too soon, obviously. Comes to Atlanta, to a really rough situation. Team blows, franchise implodes with his signing. But, man, talk about a guy who salvaged some pretty special stuff out of a career. You're right. Joe Johnson is one of my favorite players.
His Hall of Fame case reminds me of a little bit of Dominique, because it's a guy who is just known for getting buckets, basically, but he hasn't had that postseason success or extended runs in the postseason that some of his colleagues have had. And, Dominique's in. I think Joe's going to get in.
Should be interesting. Shu, appreciate it, brother.
All right, fellas.
As always.
Later.
Talk to you.
See you, man.
Lang, maybe you ought to start doing that every other episode, arguing about somebody, or at least discussing somebody's Hall of Fame case, a current player. But Joe's not the only guy I think about when I start wondering where, does he end up in the Hall of Fame someday?
Save the other ones.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. We'll save those for later dates. Very interesting, though. Appreciate everybody joining us, as always, here on the Hang Time Podcast. The NBA offseason will keep going down the track. We'll see what happens. See if Kyrie and Carmelo are on the same rosters the next time we talk to you. Be sure to follow all the NBA action you can on NBA.com. Subscribe to the podcast Hang Time on iTunes, and be sure to leave a glowing review. We'll see you right here every week in the offseason on the Hang Time Podcast.
Later.
Thanks for listening to the Hang Time Podcast, and be sure to subscribe on iTunes for a new episode every single Thursday this season. And as always, people, remember, say Kuna Matata.